The chair on the monitor wasn't facing the hallway when I looked away. I know that because I remember the empty space behind it. I remember the wall. I remember thinking the room looked too clean. When I looked back, the chair was turned toward the camera, and something was sitting in it. Story 1. I stopped trusting the cameras before I stopped looking at them. That's something I didn't realize until later, but I can feel it now when I think back. The way my eyes kept drifting to the screen even when I didn't believe what it showed me anymore. I worked security at a medical records storage facility on the edge of the city. No patients, no doctors, just rows and rows of metal shelving packed with box files. The kind of place that smelled like dust and paper no matter how new the building was. At night, it was silent in a way that felt unnatural. No traffic noise, no hum from nearby buildings. Even the air system ran low to protect the records. Most of the time, the loudest sound was my own breathing when I forgot to control it. My routine never changed. That was the rule. I checked the cameras every 15 minutes. I walked the same patrol route every hour. I logged everything, even when nothing happened. If you were there, you might have thought the sameness was comforting. I did at first. Predictable spaces feel safer. You start to believe that if something was wrong, you'd notice right away. That belief didn't last long. The first thing I noticed wasn't movement. It was stillness. There was a chair in one of the smaller archive rooms on the 3rd floor. It wasn't supposed to be there. That room had no desk, no workstation, just shelves and a single emergency light. The chair must have been left behind during a cleanup years ago. Normally, it sat crooked in the corner, half hidden behind a shelf. On the camera, it was centered, not pushed neatly, not staged, just placed. I stared at the monitor longer than I should have. The camera timestamp ticked forward. Nothing else moved. No shadows. No flicker. I told myself someone on day shift must have moved it. That explanation felt thin, but it was enough to let me breathe again. I logged it. I didn't go check. That was my first mistake. During my patrol, I walked the 1st floor, then the 2nd. I left the 3rd for last like always. When I reached the archive room, the chair was back in the corner, crooked again, facing the wall. I stood there for a long time, listening to the quiet hum of the emergency light. I didn't touch the chair. I didn't adjust it. I just stood there and watched it like it might react. It didn't. I went back downstairs feeling embarrassed for getting worked up over furniture. The next night, the chair was back in the center again. This time, it was facing the door. The camera angle was wrong enough that I couldn't see the full seat, just the backrest, just enough to suggest someone could be sitting there if they wanted to. I waited for the camera to glitch. It didn't. I checked the log. No entries, no alerts, no access records. I checked the timestamp against the system clock. Everything matched. I watched the feed through an entire 15-minute interval. The chair didn't move. When I went upstairs, it was back in the corner again. I didn't sleep much that day. By the 3rd night, I started noticing patterns. The chair only moved when I wasn't watching. It only appeared centered during the 15 minutes before my patrol. It was always facing the direction I'd enter from. That realization didn't hit me all at once. It crept in slowly, piece by piece, until my stomach felt tight even while I was sitting still. I started delaying my patrols by a few minutes, watching the camera longer, waiting for something to happen. Nothing ever did. The chair stayed perfectly still. But the moment I walked away from the monitor, the moment I stood up and reached for my keys, the next time I looked, it was centered again, facing the door. If you were there, you might have convinced yourself it was a coincidence too. I did, until the night I decided not to go upstairs. I stayed in the security office. I skipped the patrol and logged a system check instead. I told myself I'd go later. After another camera sweep, the chair stayed in the corner. 15 minutes passed. Still nothing. I started to relax. My shoulders dropped. I even laughed quietly at myself for letting my imagination run wild. That's when the chair turned. Not all at once, just enough to change its angle. The movement was slow enough that I wasn't sure I'd seen it. I rewound the footage, played it back. The chair rotated a few inches between frames. There was no blur, no jump, just a gradual change, like someone nudging it while standing perfectly still. I felt my mouth go dry. I stood up. The camera feed changed. The chair was closer, not dragged, not scraped, just closer to the door. I don't remember deciding to go upstairs. I just remember being there, my hand shaking as I unlocked the third-floor door. The archive room was empty. No chair. I checked behind the shelves, the corners, the wall. Nothing. When I turned around to leave, the chair was behind me, centered, facing the door I'd come through. I didn't run. I don't know why I didn't run. I backed out slowly, keeping my eyes on it, my heart pounding so hard it felt loud enough to echo. I locked the door. I went downstairs. I quit 2 days later. They told me no one else had reported anything strange. But the chair is still listed on the inventory. And sometimes, when I think about the camera feed, I can't remember if the chair ever faced the door before I did. Story 2. The radio clicked once. Not static, not feedback, just a single, clean click. I froze with my hand still resting on the push-to-talk button, waiting for the usual response. Someone clearing their throat. Someone asking me to repeat myself. Nothing came back. I worked overnight security at a corporate office tower downtown. 23 floors, mostly glass and steel. During the day, it was full of people, noise, motion. At night, it felt hollow. The building had a strange way of swallowing sound. Footsteps didn't echo the way you'd expect. Voices felt thin, like they were being pulled away before they could settle. My job was simple. Monitor cameras, respond to alarms, check in with cleaning crews when they passed through. One floor was always empty. Floor 19. No offices, no furniture, just bare carpet and unfinished walls. It had been under renovation for years, stalled by permits and budget issues. No one was supposed to be up there, ever. That was why the click mattered. I called out again. Slow, clear, security to any unit on 19. Please confirm. Silence. I checked the access logs. No card swipes. No elevator stops. No stairwell doors opened. Still, the radio had clicked. If you were there, you might have told yourself it was interference. A cross signal from another building. Old equipment doing what old equipment does. I wanted to believe that. I decided to ride the elevator up. Not because I thought someone was there, but because I needed the radio silence to make sense. The elevator doors opened to darkness. The emergency lights were on, but they barely reached past the first few feet. The rest of the floor faded into gray shapes and shadow. I stepped out. The carpet felt newer than the rest of the building. Too clean. No footprints. No scuffs. I called out again. My voice sounded wrong up there. Flat. Thin. The radio stayed quiet. As I walked, I noticed something small. Something I wouldn't have seen if I wasn't already tense. The emergency lights weren't all on. Some were off completely. Not flickering. Not broken. Just off. That shouldn't have been possible. They were on a separate power system, designed to stay lit no matter what. I stopped walking. I waited. Nothing moved. I told myself I'd gone far enough. I turned back toward the elevator. That's when the radio clicked again. Closer this time. Not louder. Just nearer. I spun around, scanning the dark. Who's there? I asked. I hated how small my voice sounded. The click came again. Then a breath. Not through the radio. Behind me. I didn't turn right away. I don't know why. Maybe part of me thought if I didn't look, it wouldn't be real. That the moment I faced it, whatever explanation I still had would fall apart. I waited. The breathing didn't get closer. It didn't fade either. It stayed exactly where it was, matching my own inhale and exhale like an echo that shouldn't exist. When I finally turned, there was nothing there. The floor was empty. The breathing stopped. The radio clicked one last time. I left. I didn't log the incident. I couldn't figure out how to describe it without sounding unstable. The next night, floor 19 called again. Same click, same silence. This time I didn't go up. I watched the cameras instead. There was no movement, no shadows, but the audio channel for that floor was active, recording, picking up sound. I turned up the volume. At first, I heard nothing. Then footsteps, slow, careful, pacing, back and forth across an empty floor that shouldn't have made any noise at all. I listened for a long time, long enough to realize the footsteps stopped whenever I moved, whenever I shifted in my chair, whenever I breathed too loudly. They only resumed when I was still. If you were there, you might have held your breath too. I did. The footsteps stopped right in front of the camera. The radio clicked, and a voice came through. Not words, just an attempt, like someone trying to remember how speaking worked. I shut the system down. They never assigned me back to that building. Floor 19 is still unfinished, and no one can explain why the radio channel is permanently open. Story 3. The camera blinked. Just once. Cameras aren't supposed to blink. They flicker. They freeze. They lose signal for a second and come back with static or compression blocks. But this one closed completely. Like an eye. I remember leaning forward in my chair when it happened, my fingers tightening around the edge of the desk before I even realized I'd moved. The screen went black for less than a second, then returned to the hallway view like nothing had happened. I stared at it longer than I meant to. I told myself it was a refresh glitch, old firmware, a hiccup in the feed. That explanation felt thin, but it was enough to keep me seated. I worked security at a private research campus built just outside the city, surrounded by woods on 3 sides. The buildings were low and spread out, connected by long glass corridors that reflected everything at night. During the day, it looked clean and modern, bright, open. At night, it felt exposed. Too much glass, too many angles, too many places where you could see someone long before you reached them, or think you did. There were cameras everywhere, more than any other site I'd worked. Hallways, stairwells, labs, storage rooms, exterior paths between buildings. Some overlapped so heavily that you could see one camera from another camera's feed. I liked that. I trusted those cameras more than I trusted locks, doors, or alarms. They were constant, until one of them wasn't. The first blink happened just after midnight. I noted the time out of habit, even though I didn't log it. I kept watching the feed, waiting for it to happen again. It didn't. The hallway stayed empty. Fluorescent lights humming softly through the speakers. No movement, no shadows. I went back to my rounds, but I kept that camera on one of my side monitors, glancing at it more often than the others. The second blink happened an hour later. This time, I felt it before I saw it. That sounds strange, but it's the only way I can describe it. A tightening in my chest, a sudden awareness that something was about to change. The screen darkened again, and this time, the darkness had shape. It wasn't static. It wasn't pixel noise. It curved, top to bottom, like lids closing. I leaned closer to the monitor, my skin prickling, my reflection faintly visible in the glass of the screen. When the feed returned, everything looked normal again. Same hallway, same lights, same empty floor. But my heart was beating faster now. I rewound the footage, frame by frame. The blink wasn't a cut. It wasn't a dropped signal. There was no compression artifact, no distortion. The image simply closed. I checked the camera model number listed in the system. I pulled up the spec sheet. That camera didn't have a physical shutter. It wasn't capable of that motion. I sat back in my chair and let out a slow breath, forcing myself to relax. If you were there, You might have told yourself the same thing I did, that you were reading too much into it, that staring at screens all night messes with your head. I logged a maintenance request anyway, just in case. No one came. The next night, I passed that hallway during my patrol. The corridor was long and narrow, glass walls on both sides, labs dark behind them. My footsteps sounded louder there, sharper, like the space amplified everything I did. The camera hung from the ceiling at the midpoint, red light steady. It looked exactly like it always had. I stopped beneath it. I don't know why. I remember looking up, squinting slightly, trying to see if there was anything different about it in person. Any sign of movement. Any sign it could do what I'd seen. It didn't move, but I felt watched anyway. That feeling followed me for days. Not sharp fear, not panic, just a constant awareness, like standing too close to someone you can't see. The camera blinked again the following shift. Then again, always when I was looking directly at it. Never when I glanced sideways. Never when I was focused on another screen. Never when my attention drifted. Only when I met its gaze. If you were there, you might have looked away too. I did. At first, it was instinctive. The moment my eyes locked on that feed, I'd feel uncomfortable and shift my focus to something else. Check another camera. Adjust my chair. Pretend I needed to write something down. And every time I looked back, the feed was normal. No blink. No movement. Like it was waiting for my attention. I started testing it without admitting that's what I was doing. I'd stare at the screen, counting in my head. 1, 2, 3. Sometimes it wouldn't blink at all. Sometimes it would close for a fraction of a second and reopen. The timing was inconsistent, and that bothered me more than if it had been predictable. Unpredictable meant it wasn't mechanical. It meant it was deciding. I stopped going down that hallway during my patrols. I adjusted my route slightly, telling myself it was to save time. The campus was big enough that skipping one corridor didn't raise any red flags. But even when I avoided it physically, the camera followed me. I noticed it first on another feed, a camera covering a different corridor entirely. As I walked through, the image shifted slightly. Auto-tracking, I thought, except that camera didn't have auto-tracking enabled. I checked the settings. Manual. No motion following software. I rewound the footage. The adjustment was small, almost subtle enough to miss, just enough to keep me centered in the frame as I passed through. I watched it again and again. Every time, the camera corrected itself, not smoothly, hesitantly, like it was learning how fast I moved, how I changed direction, how long I paused. The next night, I tried to ignore it. I focused on my routine, checked doors, checked logs, walked my rounds at the same pace I always had. But everywhere I went, cameras adjusted. Not all of them, just enough. Always keeping me visible, always keeping me centered. I stopped in one hallway and stood perfectly still. I waited. The camera held its position. I raised my hand slowly. The camera shifted upward. I lowered it. The camera followed. My mouth went dry. I told myself it was coincidence. Lag. Software bugs cascading through the system. I checked the logs. No input commands. No remote access. No system errors. Just the cameras correcting themselves. That was the night I stayed late. I didn't want to be alone with it, but I also didn't want to leave. Some part of me felt like leaving would be a mistake, like turning my back on something that had already decided to watch me. I sat at the desk long after my patrol should have ended, staring at the monitors, my reflection faintly layered over the feeds. The blinking camera closed again. This time it stayed closed longer. A full second. 2. When it opened, the hallway was empty, but the angle was different. Lower, closer to the floor, as if it had leaned in. My breathing sounded loud in my ears. I realized I'd been holding it without noticing. I stood up. Every camera on my wall adjusted. Not at once. One by one. Click, click, click. Tiny movements barely audible through the speakers, but enough to make my skin crawl. They were all pointed at the security desk now. At me. I backed away slowly, my chair bumping into the wall behind me. I didn't run. I didn't shout. I just stood there, watching myself from a dozen angles. If you were there, you might have frozen too. I covered the blinking camera first. I grabbed a roll of black tape from the supply drawer and pressed it over the lens, my hands shaking enough that I had to smooth it down twice to make sure it stuck. The feed went black. I felt a brief, sharp relief. Then another camera adjusted. I covered that one too. Then another. I worked my way through the system, taping over lenses until my fingers hurt and my pulse pounded in my throat. When I checked the monitors again, the feeds were still live, still clear, still watching. From inside, the image wasn't coming from the lens anymore. It was coming from somewhere behind it. I stepped away from the desk. The cameras leaned closer. I left the building without signing out. I never went back. They told me later that the cameras had been removed during a system upgrade, replaced with newer models. No issues reported. But sometimes, when I'm alone at night, I get the feeling that if I look up, something will blink first. Story 4. The logbook had an extra name. That was the first thing that felt wrong. I noticed it at the end of my shift, flipping through the pages like I always did, pen still in my hand, already thinking about going home. Timestamps, patrol notes, equipment checks, everything in its usual place. Then a name I didn't recognize. Signed in, not signed out. I stopped flipping pages. I went back and looked again, slower this time, my finger tracing the line as if that might change what I was seeing. The handwriting was neat, careful, almost deliberate in a way that stood out compared to the rushed, tired scribbles most of us left behind at 3 or 4 in the morning. It didn't look fake. That bothered me more than if it had. I checked the date. It was that night. I checked the time. It matched the start of my shift exactly. I remember standing there in the small security office, the hum of the lights suddenly too loud, the building feeling farther away than it should have. There were only supposed to be 2 guards assigned to that site, and I was the only one scheduled overnight. I flipped back through previous pages. No sign of the name anywhere else. Just that one entry. Signed in. No sign out. I told myself someone might have written it by mistake. Maybe a day shift guard filling out the wrong line. Maybe someone playing a stupid joke. That explanation didn't sit right, but it was better than the alternatives. The building was an old municipal complex. Concrete, narrow hallways, offices that hadn't been updated in decades. It wasn't abandoned, but it felt like it wanted to be. After hours, it belonged to the guards. No staff, no cleaners, no visitors, just long corridors and locked doors. I asked my supervisor about the name the next morning. He barely looked up from his screen, smiled like I'd said something amusing. Probably an old employee, he said. Someone who quit years ago. We didn't switch to digital logs until recently. Don't worry about it. I tried to push the issue. Told him the date was current. He shrugged. People make mistakes, he said. You sure it wasn't you writing on the wrong line? I knew it wasn't. I knew my handwriting. But arguing felt pointless. He clearly wasn't taking it seriously, and I didn't want to sound paranoid over a name in a book. So I dropped it. That was my second mistake. The next night, I checked the logbook as soon as I arrived. The name was still there. Same line. Same handwriting. Still not signed out. I didn't add my name below it. I waited. I don't know what I was waiting for exactly, but something about writing my name beneath that one felt wrong, like acknowledging it would make it real in a way I wasn't ready for. I decided to check the cameras instead. The building had decent coverage for its age. Not everywhere, but enough to track movement through the main corridors and entry points. I pulled up the footage from the previous night, starting at the time the name had been signed in. At first, everything looked normal. The front desk camera showed me sitting there, half lit by the monitors, shifting occasionally in my chair. The hallway cameras showed empty corridors, closed doors, stillness. Then I noticed something subtle, movement that didn't quite register as movement. On one of the hallway feeds, the exposure shifted slightly, like the camera was adjusting to a change in light. I rewound the footage and played it again. There was a shape, tall, narrow, always just at the edge of the frame. I advanced the video frame by frame, my stomach tightening with each click. The shape moved when I moved, appearing in the next camera down the hall seconds after I passed through. I switched feeds. There were two of us, one at the desk, one walking the halls. The second figure never faced the camera directly, never stepped fully into the light. It stayed just far enough away that its details blurred into shadow. But the timing was perfect. When I stopped, it stopped. When I turned, it turned. It followed my patrol route exactly. If you were there, you might have told yourself it was a trick of perspective, a reflection, a compression artifact. I wanted it to be. I watched the footage again and again. The longer I watched, the more certain I became that it wasn't a coincidence. The figure didn't wander, didn't hesitate. It moved with purpose, keeping pace with me like it knew where I was going next, like it had done this before. I checked the timestamps against the logbook. The name had been signed in 1 minute before I arrived. The first appearance of the figure happened 1 minute after. I closed the video player and sat back in my chair, my heart pounding harder than it should have. I didn't sleep that day. That night, I didn't write my name in the logbook. I left the line blank. I told myself it was temporary, just until I figured out what was going on. The extra name stayed. Every night, it appeared at the top of the page. Same handwriting, same careful letters. Always signed in, never signed out. I started feeling watched before I ever saw anything new on the cameras. That familiar tightening in the chest. That sense of being slightly out of sync with the space around you. Like someone standing just behind you, close enough to hear you breathe. During my patrols, I listened more carefully, counted my footsteps, paused in doorways longer than necessary. Sometimes I thought I heard another set of steps behind mine. Sometimes I convinced myself it was just my echo. If you were there, you might have ignored it too. I tried to. One night, I stopped halfway down the main corridor and turned around suddenly. The hallway was empty. Light steady, doors closed, but the air felt disturbed, like something had just moved through it. I checked the camera later. The figure stopped when I did. It stood just out of frame, waiting. The next night, I changed my route. I skipped sections, took different turns, walked the floors out of order. On the cameras, the figure adapted. It didn't hesitate. It didn't get lost. It adjusted instantly, appearing ahead of me instead of behind, as if it knew where I'd end up before I did. That was the night I noticed the detail that finally broke me. The uniform. It wasn't the same as mine. It was older, slightly different cut. The patch on the shoulder was the wrong shape, the logo outdated by at least a decade. I paused the footage and zoomed in as far as the system allowed. The name badge was visible for a split second as the figure passed under a light. I couldn't read it, but I could see there was a name there. I checked the employee records the next day. There was a match. A guard who'd worked that building years ago. Quiet, reliable, overnight shifts, mostly alone. He'd been found during a morning check. Collapsed at the end of a hallway. Cause of death listed as natural. Heart failure. I stared at the record longer than I should have. The date of his death matched the date his name stopped appearing in the old paper logs. Signed in, never signed out. That night, I didn't do a patrol. I stayed at the desk, every camera pulled up, every light on. I told myself that if I didn't move, it wouldn't either. The logbook was already filled out. The name sat at the top of the page. I listened to the building settle. Pipes ticking, distant creaks. The familiar sounds I usually ignored now felt deliberate, paced like footsteps I couldn't quite hear. The cameras showed empty halls. Then, One adjusted, just slightly, pointing back toward the desk. Another followed, then another. I didn't move. I didn't blink. On the front desk camera, I saw it, standing behind me, just close enough that its reflection overlapped mine on the monitor. The uniform looked faded, worn thin in places. The name badge was blank. I felt cold breath near my ear. I didn't turn around. If you were there, you might have stayed still too. I don't remember leaving the building. I don't remember grabbing my keys or clocking out. All I remember is standing outside in the early morning light, my hands shaking, my heart racing, the doors locked behind me. I quit that day. They told me later that the logbooks had been archived, replaced with digital entries only. No more handwritten names. But sometimes when I think about that building, I wonder who's still signing in and who's still walking the halls after everyone else leaves. Story 5. The building went quiet all at once. Not slowly, not gradually, instantly, like someone had pressed pause on the world. I was halfway through my patrol when it happened. One step echoed against the tile floor, sharp and familiar. The next step should have followed. It didn't. The sound was swallowed completely. No hum from the lights. No distant traffic through the walls. No air moving through vents. Nothing. I stopped walking with my foot still half raised, my body unsure whether it was safe to finish the step. The silence felt wrong immediately. Not peaceful, not calm, heavy. It pressed against my ears so hard it almost hurt, like standing underwater without realizing it. I lowered my foot slowly. The sound didn't return. I stood there, heart beating hard enough that I could feel in my throat, listening for anything. A creak, a buzz, even the ringing you get when a room is too quiet. Nothing came back. That was when I realized the building wasn't empty. It was listening. I worked overnight security at a government office complex that took up nearly a full city block. Old construction, thick concrete walls, narrow corridors that turned suddenly and never quite lined up right. During the day, it was loud. Phones ringing, printers running, people talking over each other. At night, it usually settled into a familiar rhythm. Air systems cycling, lights buzzing faintly, pipes knocking in the walls. That rhythm was gone. I checked my radio. Dead. Not static. Not interference. Dead silence. I tried again, pressing the button longer this time, watching the indicator light glow red. My own breathing sounded too loud in my head, but the radio didn't carry it. I lowered my hand. The silence stayed perfect. If you were there, you might have told yourself it was a power issue, a temporary outage, something technical. I want to believe that. But the emergency lights were still on. The hallway wasn't dark. My flashlight still worked. My watch ticked softly against my wrist. The building wasn't off. It was quiet. I waited. I don't know how long. Long enough that my muscles started to ache from standing still. Long enough that my thoughts slowed down, like my mind didn't want to move too fast in a place like that. The silence didn't change. It didn't fade. It didn't deepen. It stayed exactly the same. Eventually, I took another step. The sound came back, but not mine. Something else moved at the same time. Not ahead of me. Not behind. Beside me. The sound was subtle. Not a footstep exactly. More like pressure shifting. Like air being displaced by something that wasn't there a second before. I froze again. The sound stopped with me. I swallowed, my throat dry, and forced myself to breathe slowly through my nose. Every inhale felt too loud in my own head, but the building didn't react. I told myself it was my imagination. I took another step. The sound came again. Matched. Perfectly timed. I stopped. It stopped. That's when fear settled in. Not sharp, not panicked, but deep and heavy. The kind that makes you careful. The kind that tells you not to rush. I stood there and waited again. The silence felt closer now. Not louder. Closer. Like it had shifted its attention. I glanced down the hallway. The lights stretched out in a straight line, evenly spaced, disappearing around a corner. Everything looked normal. Too normal. I reached up and tapped the wall lightly with my knuckle. Nothing. No echo. No dull thud. It was like the sound never existed. I pulled my hand back slowly. My heart was pounding hard enough now that I wondered if I was the only thing making noise in the building. I decided to go back to the security office. Not because I was sure something was wrong, but because staying still felt worse. I turned around carefully. The hallway behind me looked the same as the one ahead. I took a step. The building responded. The same subtle shift. The same invisible movement beside me. Keeping pace. If you were there, you might have sped up just to test it. I didn't. I walked slowly, deliberately, counting my steps in my head. 1, 2, 3. Every time my foot touched the floor, the building moved with me. Not ahead, not behind, beside. When I stopped, it stopped. When I hesitated, it waited. By the time I reached the security office, my hands were shaking. I unlocked the door and stepped inside, closing it quietly behind me. The room felt smaller than it had before. The monitors glowed softly, showing empty corridors, stairwells, entrances. All silent. I sat down slowly and listened. The building didn't breathe. It didn't settle. It held the silence perfectly. I checked the cameras one by one. No movement. No flickers. No glitches. The audio channels were flat. I turned the volume all the way up. Still nothing. Even my own room didn't come through the feed. That was when I noticed something small. On one of the hallway cameras, the one I just walked through, the framing was different. Not by much, just slightly closer to the center of the hall, as if it had leaned in. I stared at the screen, my eyes dry, my back stiff against the chair. The camera didn't move again. I told myself I was done patrolling for the night. I logged a system check instead, writing slower than usual, careful to keep my hand steady. The pen scratching against paper sounded unnaturally loud. I sat there for a long time. The silence didn't break. After what felt like an hour, I stood up. The moment I did, every monitor flickered. Not off, not static, just a subtle adjustment. Every camera reframed slightly, centering on the security office door. I froze. The silence felt closer again, thicker, like pressure building in a sealed room. I sat back down slowly. The cameras stopped moving. I stayed seated. Minutes passed. Nothing changed. If you were there, you might have convinced yourself it was coincidence. I almost did. Eventually, I needed the bathroom. The thought of standing up again made my chest tighten, but staying put forever wasn't an option. I pushed the chair back carefully. The building responded immediately, not with sound, with presence. I felt it this time, a pressure shift, a subtle resistance in the air, like pushing through water. I stood anyway. The cameras adjusted, all of them, tracking my movement toward the door. I walked. The silence followed, not lagging, not rushing, matching me perfectly. Every step I took, it took with me, waiting, learning. I didn't go to the bathroom. I didn't go anywhere. I turned around and sat back down. The building stopped. The rest of the shift passed like that. Me sitting, the building waiting. We stayed that way until the first hint of morning light crept through the high windows. That's when the sound came back. All at once, air rushing through vents, lights humming, pipes knocking faintly. The world unpaused. I sat there, shaking, listening to the building breathe again like nothing had happened. When day's shift arrived, I didn't mention it. I didn't know how. I clocked out and went home, trying to convince myself it had been exhaustion. Stress. My mind filling the silence with something it shouldn't have. I slept badly. That night, I didn't want to go back. But I did. The building was normal when I arrived. Loud in its usual ways. Predictable. I started my patrol carefully. Halfway through the same hallway, it happened again. Instant silence. This time I didn't stop. I kept walking. The building moved with me. closer than before, not beside me anymore, just behind, close enough that I could feel it waiting for me to stop. I didn't. I finished my patrol without slowing, every step tight and controlled, my heart racing, my ears straining for any change. The silence lasted until I sat back down at the desk. Then the sound returned. I quit the next morning. They replaced me quickly. No one reported any issues. But sometimes, late at night, when I'm alone in a quiet room, I feel again that pause, that perfect silence, like something nearby has stopped breathing and is waiting for me to move first. Which story stayed with you the longest? Let me know in the comments. New true horror stories are coming soon.